The actual, for those of you that are at the last TU, in fact, who was at the last TU? Yeah, most of us. Okay, but it's basically exactly the same presentation, but I'm going to go a lot slower. I only had about 20 minutes to present on last time, and I think 40. So I'll go a lot slower from before, and I've also added in a couple of extra slides which will give you a bit more information depth as well. So essentially the talk itself is called the 21st Century Health Paradox. That's what I call it, at least, and it's the battle between calorie restriction and optimal nutrition. But before I actually go on to that, the point of the presentation itself is literally just to reiterate the Nu Skin mission statement, and there's one particular part of this that really stands out for me, which is the empowering people to improve lives. So, as the statement says, we do it through more than one way, one of which is through the actual business opportunity itself, but it's also through the innovative products, and it's the products that I'm going to be paying a lot of attention to today, and two of them in particular, plus one piece of technology that aligns itself with the products. All right. So, and in doing that, I'm actually going to show you how Nu Skin, as a business vehicle, provides a value proposition that outweighs any other company in the industry. Absolute fact, in my opinion. Okay, it's not a fact out in the industry, but due to the technology and the science and everything else that we have, it really is the best company in the industry. So, is anyone reasonably new, like within the last sort of month, 2 months? Yeah, reasonably. You've been around for a little while now. I've seen your face. Yeah, 2 months. That's good. Okay, all right. So, okay. 21st Century Health Paradox, calorie control versus optimal nutrition. I'm basically going to break down those two components and explain why that is a paradox, what the problem is with one versus the other. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm obviously from the UK, as you can tell by my wacky accent. I actually started with a Bachelor in Sports Management. I've got about 8 years in health and fitness industry experience, etc., and I've also studied advanced nutrition and weight management now. As I actually go through the presentation itself, I'm more or less taking you guys on my own personal journey of going from A to Z, of starting out as a personal trainer, the sort of things that I would tell clients, and how that has changed over time due to my acquisition of knowledge and general experience with clients and things. So if I go right from the start, when I first started training clients, I'd work them really hard. They'd be training a lot more calories than they would be without me, but they weren't getting great results, basically. Which is, was very frustrating on my behalf, which is also what got me really interested in nutrition. I always knew nutrition was at least 70 to 80% of somebody's goal if they want to change body composition, so reduce body fat. And that's essentially where the journey started. So I started to look into nutrition, the problems that people are facing, the good stuff about it, etc., and this is it. So, okay. First of all, we're going to have a look at calorie control, so the left side of the equation, right? And the question is, why should we limit calorie consumption? Why is calorie control so important, right? There are some obvious bits to that, and the first of which is obviously that each individual has a total daily calorie expenditure, and excessive calorie consumption equals weight gain, right? That's pretty bog standard knowledge. If we eat more calories, calories are just energy at the end of the day, right? So if you're burning 1,500 calories and you're consuming 2,000, you're probably going to put weight on, right? Okay, so that's the first important fact. The second of which is it actually has been proven now to slow the aging process through restricting calories, right? So, and LifeGen, who, for those of you who have been here for any length of time will know, it's actually one of the companies within Nu Skin itself, along with Pharmanex, create the three invaluable companies. And LifeGen did a 20-year study, which was based on calorie restriction. It's exactly what it was based on in terms of slowing the aging process down. And you can see that A and B, you've got two different monkeys here, so A and B, who they basically monitored, in fact, both monkeys, both sets, they monitored over a 7-year period, and they just had a look at what sort of foods they were having naturally, no restriction, no nothing for that 7-year period. Now, monkeys A and B, they're basically allowed to continue with that baseline food intake for the remaining 20 years, so it's like a 27-year study. And the monkey in C and D, they actually gradually reduced their calorie intake by 30% over a 20-year period, and you can see the effect that it had. So you can see it's not the best of pictures, but I hope you can see monkey A and B, substantially bushier, the monkey to the right-hand side, and there's substantially more fur than the monkey on the right-hand side. Essentially, this monkey here, so monkey B, has essentially aged way, way better than monkey A, has purely through calorie restriction, so eating less calories on a daily basis over a prolonged period, right? So we also know that it slows down the aging process, and in doing that, it'll obviously slow down chronic degenerative diseases, cancers, heart disease, etc., which I'll go into a little bit later. Promotes healthy cellular function. It also decreases the risk of obtaining, as I said a minute ago, chronic degenerative diseases. So in other words, it just improves the health and quality of life. So that's essentially why calorie control is so important, right? Now the other side of the equation is optimal nutrition. Okay, and the question that I'm going to be answering is that, you know, can we do without supplementation, optimally nourish ourselves and at the same time restrict our calories, right? Is that physically possible? Okay, that's what I'll be answering to this presentation. So first of all, what is optimal nutrition? Well, it's essentially providing yourself with the best possible intake of nutrients to enable your body to function as well as it possibly can, right? Optimize your bodily functions, maximum energy, maximum immunity, etc., right? And sort of like, the reason I put this picture on here is have any of you ever filled your car up with diesel when it's a petrol car or vice versa? You have? You haven't? Doesn't really matter either way, but you can imagine what happens. It doesn't function very well, right? In fact, it probably ceases to function whatsoever. But as human beings, for some reason, we don't treat ourselves like we treat our cars. We don't. We put in whatever we like, and we don't even think about it. I don't know why. We just do, right? So anyway, if we all thought about our bodies like we did our cars, it'd be a much better place, healthier place. So you've got to, in terms of nutrition, you can break down food and nutrition into two different components, macronutrients and micronutrients, right? So macronutrients being fat, protein and carbohydrate, micronutrients being vitamins, minerals and phytonutrients, okay? Now, a pretty widely accepted sort of percentage on a daily basis of macronutrients would look something like this. So 40% in carbohydrates, made up of predominantly fruits, vegetables and sort of good quality carbs such as wholemeal bread, wholemeal rice, etc., as opposed to the white stuff. 30% protein, 30% dietary fat. Okay, so as I said, the question is, can we become optimally nourished eating a healthy diet alone while controlling our calorie intake? So everyone has a certain number of calories before they put on weight, and we've got to try and fit in a certain amount of nutrients within that calories every day to become optimally nourished, right? Is it possible with today's scenario, the 21st century, right? So in terms of macronutrients, well, it is absolutely possible. Yeah, 110%. Like if you eat 40% carbohydrates, 30 fat and protein on a daily basis, and it doesn't really matter how many calories you're consuming, that is very possible, right? You've obviously got to eat the right type of carbohydrates, so fats and proteins. Macronutrients are not created equally, as I've just said. So fruits, vegetables, and low glycemic carbs. High quality of protein and a good quality of fat as well. Avocados, nuts, fish, and good oils, etc. So that is a tick. That's no problem whatsoever, right? But when we have a look at micronutrients, so the other part of nutrition, that's a completely different kettle of fish, right? So, pardon the pun, but it is. So, the first thing we have to actually distinguish is what optimal levels of micronutrients are, because if you don't distinguish that, you can't really distinguish whether it's possible to obtain that through food alone, right? So, first thing, you've got to compare optimal levels versus the recommended daily allowance levels, right? And they're two very, very different things, and this is pretty confusing for the majority of the population who, you know, aren't well taught and don't really know what they're doing in terms of nutrition. So the recommended daily allowance you'll find on the actual back of most foods, and when they, you know, give you an indication of the percentage of your RDA, for example, this is just an orange juice, you'll see that in one serving you've apparently got 100% of your vitamin C in terms of your RDA, right? But your RDA is very, very different to optimal levels. So you've got optimal levels and you've got recommended daily allowance levels. They're two completely different things, right? So if you have a look at how RDAs were actually developed in the first place, early 1920s and 30s, it was basically minimal requirements of just 10 essential nutrients. I mean, there are way more than 10 essential nutrients, right? But 10 essential nutrients to avoid diseases, that was exactly how RDAs began. Early 1950s it developed and the list grew, and it actually expanded to include amounts needed for normal growth and development, right? So optimal, normal, very, very different things. So basically, when you have a look at the back of a packet now, the amount of nutrients in that particular packet, it's based on an RDA, which is based on normal growth and repair, not optimal. Okay. So to distinguish optimal levels, you've really got to have a look at what the major problems are this day and age in terms of aging and disease and things. So if you have a look at the leading underlying causes of death in Australia, this is just Australia. It's pretty similar worldwide, to be honest, but we'll look at Australia. You've got 5 there, starting with coronary heart disease, working its way down to chronic obstructive pulmonary disease as well. Right now, science basically tells us now that the leading research has established the primary cause of more than 70 chronic degenerative diseases is oxidative stress. Fact. Okay, so Nobody really knows the exact reason as to why different cancers form in different ways, because all cancers are completely and utterly different. But the one leading scientific piece of research and knowledge that still exists today, that still stands, is that they're caused by oxidative stress. It's the forefront of scientific research, right? So I haven't got time to explain all of these in detail as to prove to you exactly how these work, but I'm going to talk about two of them in particular. One of which is cancer. Just to give you a bit of background, my mum actually passed away when I was 12 from breast cancer, and I witnessed literally the start of the cancer to the end of the cancer through the chemotherapy, the loss of hair, the loss of speech, everything, right? It's not a pleasant experience that anyone should go through, right? But this is also partly why I've gone through this lengthened journey to understand and learn why these things happen, so I can try and, you know, stop other people having the same effect, essentially. So with lung cancer, the way I like to try and explain it in layman terms is basically if you every cell in the human body, right, has a nucleus. Within the nucleus you have a chromosome, and within the chromosome you've got DNA, and DNA is basically just a collection of our individual genes in that individual cell, right? Every cell is exactly the same. Now, what happens with oxidative stress is essentially an imbalance between free radicals and antioxidants, right? Where free radicals are, you've got far more free radicals going around in your body than you have antioxidants. I'll explain exactly what free radicals are a little bit later, but that's what oxidative stress is essentially. So when you've got this imbalance and you've got a compromisation in your immune system, so essentially, let's say you get pneumonia, right? Or I'll give you another example. Let's say you're deeply stressed at work, like severely stressed, to the point at which you're actually increasing your free radical production, because stress actually does that, by the way. Your body doesn't have the ability to recognize and eliminate all the precancerous cells that are going on all the time. Each and every one of us right now has got precancerous cells in our body right now, damaged cells, every single one of us, but our natural immune system is more than capable of eliminating those free radicals, except when it becomes severely compromised, right? So that's when you're in trouble. Now, essentially what happens is when that occurs, you get a certain amount of free radical damage to one particular cell. You end up actually damaging the cell DNA itself, right? And the DNA is like the cell brain. It communicates to the cell. It tells exactly what to do. So if you picture a zombie movie, right? Who's seen zombie movies? Yeah, everyone's watched a zombie movie, right? Yeah, okay. So the way in which a zombie movie starts is one normal human being gets a virus, essentially, right? And they turn into a zombie, and a zombie essentially hasn't even got any thought, it's got no brain, whatever else. It just has two functions. One, it's really hard to kill. And the second one is it just goes around and infects loads of other healthy people and turns them into zombies, right? That's exactly what cancer is, right? When you get this free radical damage that affects the DNA of the cell itself, the brain of that cell, two things happen. It doesn't die anymore, so you don't get cell death, basically. And the second of which is it spreads very quickly and it infects others, right? So just think about a zombie movie. That's basically what happens with cancer, right? There are 100 trillion cells there or thereabouts in the human body, okay, 100 trillion. So the reason as to why it takes so long to diagnose cancer most of the time using like a mammogram or something is because it takes a long time for that one cell to affect enough cells for you to get a tumour. And a tumour is basically the first sign that we end up getting, that we can actually identify that we've got cancer. So it could take 30 years after that initial cell damage that we actually get identified with having cancer. Cancer is just the end stage, and along that path you can actually stop the whole thing happening with optimal nutrition. You can. By the time it gets there, well, two schools of thought, right? But up until that stage you can actually prevent and stop the stuff happening, okay? So the second one is coronary heart disease. So just really briefly, otherwise I could be talking for the next 3 hours. I'm going to talk to you about how this happens as well. So it's essentially the narrowing of arteries through a buildup of fat. Okay, that's exactly what coronary heart disease is, right? The narrowing of arteries through a buildup of fat. So the risk factors I've listed on the left-hand side here. So you've got obvious things like smoking, high blood pressure, high blood cholesterol. Homocysteine is another conversation, but diabetes, activity, obesity, family history, and age, right? So, but the real cause of coronary heart disease is actually inflammation of the blood vessels themselves. It's not high cholesterol. So I'm not going to go into the history of how cholesterol started and whatever else, but put it this way. Do you reckon pharmaceutical companies make a lot of money through statins?
Yeah.
Huge. Yeah, they make billions and billions of dollars through statins, right? And that's all I'm going to say on the subject. But essentially, it's not cholesterol that causes coronary heart disease, it's inflammation of the blood vessels. Cholesterol doesn't help. And in particular, LDL cholesterol doesn't help. So there are two different types. There's HDL, right? And there's also LDL. HDL is the good stuff, LDL is the bad stuff, right? But if you have a look at the bottom, as I've said there, LDL cholesterol is actually required by the body for building cell membranes, right? So this bad cholesterol is actually required anyway in certain amounts, right? Not excessive amounts, but certain amounts. So the way this thing actually occurs is basically, if you have a look at the inside of an artery, right, you've got, this is called the endothelium, or thelium, however you want to pronounce it, but we'll just say endothelium for today. And it's basically a really, really thin lining, and it's only one cell deep, right, and it's damaged very, very easily, right? So what essentially happens is that when we have a fair bit of LDL cholesterol floating around inside our arteries, ordinarily you'll get things called macrophages that literally go along and pick up this LDL cholesterol and deposit it when it's needed. Natural LDL cholesterol, nothing wrong with it, right? The reason it becomes a problem is when it becomes oxidized, basically, through, once again, free radical damage. So when you get excessive free radicals that oxidize particles of LDL cholesterol, then it becomes a real problem. So these macrophages, which are just basically part of our body's own immune system, will still go and collect these LDL cholesterol particles, but instead of actually depositing them, it doesn't deposit them because they've now been oxidized and they're pretty dangerous, and our body's immune system recognizes this, right? So these things are, if I explain this another term, right, if you just picture a school bus that picks up a load of children, right, normal weight children, gets up to its maximum capacity, drives around, drops them off where they need to be, works fine, right? In this particular scenario, instead of dropping off children, it doesn't drop them off because they're dangerous to the community, and it keeps piling children on until the bus basically implodes and it can't move anymore. That's exactly what happens with a macrophage, right? So it goes along picking up these damaged LDL cholesterol parts but doesn't deposit them until eventually it becomes what you call a foam cell. So if you have a look here, macrophage is transformed into foam cells. A foam cell is exactly how you would imagine it would be. It's like just a fatty lump of rubbish, right, full of this damaged LDL cholesterol, oxidized LDL cholesterol. And when that happens, our body's own natural immune system actually starts to damage the inner lining of the artery itself. So these foam cells start depositing them on the inner side of the artery, just in between the smooth muscle and the endothelium. This actual space here is where all the damage occurs. And essentially you end up with hardening of the arteries, and the actual muscle itself starts to thicken as well, and you don't just get hardening of the arteries, but you actually get constriction of the artery and a narrowing as well, and that's essentially how the start of the whole thing occurs, coronary heart disease essentially. At one point then you'll end up with platelets. The platelets rupture, you get a blood clot, and that's normally the sign when somebody gets a heart attack essentially, and it stops the blood from even reaching their heart or whatever else. So all you really need to know about that is that it's caused by oxidative stress, okay? So, prevention for optimal levels, right? So I basically picked a certain number of nutrients. I could have picked loads of them, but I've just picked 7 for this particular example. And I've compared the RDA with optimal levels, right? And the way I've established these optimal levels is essentially through medical literature based on amounts necessary to prevent oxidative stress. So, for the sake of this presentation, that's how I've determined optimal levels of nutrients, right? On medical literature, based around preventing oxidative stress, okay? So, except for 2 exceptions there, you've got vitamin D and folic acid. Vitamin D is an interesting one. Obviously, we primarily get it from sunlight and things, but vitamin D is the one thing that you can get in optimal amounts quite easily, if I'm going to be completely honest, really easily, right? And you'll see that on the next page as well. But would you believe that nearly 1/3 of Australians are deficient in vitamin D? Right? Vitamin D, the easiest vitamin to get. We're in the sunniest place on the planet, right? And 1/3 of Australians, true story, Google it, have a look on the Vitamin D Council site, whatever you want to do. Nearly 1/3 of Australians are deficient in vitamin D. So what does that say for the rest of the nutrients? Yeah, pretty stuffed. So, okay. So if you have a look at the food required to actually achieve these optimal levels, which once again I've taken some time to derive. Vitamin D, for example, if you have 250 grams of farm salmon, which is quite a lot for one serving, I'd probably have that amount in one serving, you're sorted, you're done. So vitamin C is not too bad. Vitamin D is not too bad. All the other vitamins on there, if you have a look, it's really, really difficult to obtain the optimal amounts of nutrients, just through diet alone on a daily basis. You've got to be consistent with this to get those optimal levels. That is exactly what's required. Right? Not easy, okay? So why is this, first of all? It's easy for me to say that, but why, right? So first of all, you've got modern day farming, which depletes nutrition. So there was a 1992 Earth Summit, basically. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. We're the best of a bad bunch in Australia, thankfully. Still not great, but it's not good. That's actually the percentage of mineral depletion from soil during the past 100 years by continent, right? So the amount of mineral and nutrients in our soils is gradually depleting through a number of reasons, one of which is the actual population increases. Farmers don't get paid on the quality of their produce, they get paid on volume, obviously, right? The other issue as well is that what traditionally should happen with soil is it should go through a 6-month cropping period followed by a 6 months worth of rest, where it actually gets a chance to replenish its nutrients and everything else. That doesn't really happen anymore for the reason I've just told you about, okay? So you can have a look at the actual reduction in average mineral content of fruit and vegetables between 1941 and 91 here as well. You can see it's as high as 76% in copper in vegetables, etc. So that's one of the problems. More problems. Foods are harvested a lot earlier to last even longer. Now, just think about this logically in your head, right? Why are different fruits and vegetables coloured differently? What is it that makes them coloured differently? Anyone? Why are fruits and vegetables coloured differently? What is it that actually makes them? Yeah, correct. It's antioxidants, but it's phytonutrients and things in there that basically make them different colours. So when your parents, has anyone had it, you know, when they were younger, their parents say you need to eat a multitude of different colours in vegetables, get your greens, get your reds in. Well, it's true, and that's why. Because different coloured fruits and vegetables supply us with different ranges and varieties of antioxidants and nutrients, basically. But what happens if you pick something, you know, 3 or 4 weeks before it's ripe? What's the colour like? It's not the colour that you end up in the end product, is it, right? Which tells you what, logically? That the low antioxidants, right? So that's one of the problems. And due to importation and other things, I mean, if you go into a supermarket, you'll see just how many foods are actually imported this day and age. It's insane. It's worse in the UK, where I'm from here. We're all right in Australia. It's not as bad as the UK, but it's still pretty bad. Nutritional content's not been fully developed. Foods are stored for weeks or months after they've been picked. So even if they're ripe when they're picked, it's stored for so long that, you know, part of the nutrition in there is depleted by the time it even gets into our mouths as well. Overcooking destroys nutrition, and sustained heat of 48 degrees destroys a lot of the enzymes in food, which we then struggle to actually break down and absorb the nutrients from. Right? So there's loads and loads of problems with this day and age, which gives us a lot of food for thought, right? A lot of food for thought, literally. Now, there's also a second part to this problem, right? So I've basically established why it's difficult to get optimal levels of antioxidants, but what I haven't established is what the problem is with excessive free radical production, right? So I'm going to address that right now. So there are 2 different ways in which we get excessive free radical production, right? The first of which is from within the body. If you want to say it in posh terms, it's endogenous ROS production, which basically ROS just stands for reactive oxygen species, which is another word for free radicals, right? They're just basically particles that go. A free radical essentially is a molecule that goes around that has at least one unpaired electron on its outer shell, right? In chemistry terms, at least one unpaired electron on its outer shell, so it's unstable basically. And it literally goes around trying to stabilize itself, causing damage to other particles within the body, and it can cause, you know, severe sort of reactions and things, and each reaction can get worse and worse and worse basically. And you can actually, sometimes it's that bad when a free radical, you know, hits another molecule and steals its atom. You can actually see real fine sort of lights of white as that happens at the cellular level. It's amazing. So anyway, first of all, your immune system, right? Chronic inflammation. So your immune system actually deliberately creates free radicals in order to combat viruses and diseases and whatever else out there. It actually creates them, okay? Which is normally okay if we've got a virus, but when we get chronic inflammation, so it could be through loads and loads of different reasons. You could have a severe operation and you'd be inflamed for a long time after that. Your body ends up trying to repair itself, but through doing so, it actually produces an excess amount of free radicals, which then causes damage to itself. Energy production, right? We actually can't help. There's nothing that you can do to stop free radicals circulating around the body and being produced. It's physically impossible, right? It actually happens through energy production, the reduction of oxygen to ATP. So you should probably all know, if you know what R squared is, then you'll know this factor. But within each cell as well as having a nucleus, we also have mitochondria, which is like the powerhouse of each cell, right? What generates energy. Now, in energy production, basically, what happens, these mitochondria reduce oxygen to ATP, and most of the time, it occurs without fault. It's perfect, right? But 1 to 2% of the time, occasionally it produces free radicals in that particular process. So if you think about a car with petrol, basically, for a car to produce energy, what are some of the things that come out of the exhaust that are detrimental to everything? Carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, lots of other things. It's the same sort of thing with our body. So occasionally we produce things that are actually negative in our energy production, right? So the other two things that can actually increase that, one is actually excessive exercise. So think about it logically. If you now understand that energy production can cause free radicals, if we're exercising more and we're requiring more energy, then it makes sense that we produce more free radicals, right? And the second one of those, or the fourth one, is actually excessive stress as well, which causes lots of biological things to go on and exacerbates oxidative stress as well. So would you say that this day and age, those four problems are probably exacerbated in comparison to how they were 50 to 100 years ago? Stress, excessive exercise, I'd definitely say so with stress. I'm not sure about excessive exercise, but stress is such an undervalued factor, it's amazing. Yeah. Okay, and you've also got exogenous ROS production as well. In other words, external factors that increase free radical production. First of which is pollution. That's a picture I took from, I think it's Shanghai, in China. You can actually see the amount of pollution and smog. It's unbelievable. Smoking, sunlight is another one. Preservatives, chemicals and pesticides, which are on our foods all the time. In fact, the average apple is sprayed with about 17 different pesticides. Average, right? If you get organic stuff, it's obviously going to be a lot better. But the average non-organic apple, 17 different pesticides. Fact, right? And bear in mind, what are pesticides for? Why do we even spray stuff with pesticides? What do? They exterminate living things, right? And then we ingest them. It's good. Okay, trans and hydrogenated fats is another problem. Water contamination is a huge problem. Medications and radiation as well, right? So, okay, that's the problem. So the modern day problem, way too much free radical production and nowhere near enough antioxidant consumption. It's that simple, right? That's the big problem. That is why those degenerative diseases are by far and away the biggest killers, because you've got this huge imbalance occurring. So, next step, if food can't give us everything that we need, with everything that's going on, what about nutritional supplements? So you've got to look, you know, we're all with at the moment, I think everyone in the room is pretty fixated. They understand new skin, you're all with new skin, right? But you've got to look at this from a non-biased perspective. So if you have a look at the case against nutritional supplementation, because it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, I'm just going to show you 3 studies. I didn't really go through this in detail at the TU, I didn't have time, but I'll go through a little bit more detail. So the first of which, these are just widely known in the media, and pharmaceutical companies, a lot of other people love this stuff, obviously. So, finished study, about 30,000 heavy smokers dived into 4 equal groups. They were observed over a 5 to 8 year period, and essentially the study showed that there was no reduction in the incidence of lung cancer, and also the group taking beta-carotene alone actually showed an increase in the incidence of lung cancer, right? So that's the first one. Carrot study is the second one, so 18,000 smokers. Some received 15 milligrams of beta-carotene and 25,000 IU of vitamin A. And you can see again there was an increase in the incidence of lung cancer in the group that was taking the supplements. And the third one, the Physicians' Health Study, and don't panic, right? There are stories behind these, but you've got to look at this from both sides of the coin. So the Physicians' Health Study, 22,000 US health male physicians who took either 50 milligrams of beta-carotene or a placebo for 12 years. And the supplementation showed no benefit or negative effect when it came to lung cancer or heart disease, right? So what can we tell from these particular studies, right? What are these telling us? Well, first of which, obviously, if you're a smoker at high risk of developing lung cancer, you shouldn't take beta-carotene alone, okay? So lesson 1 is essentially don't take very high levels of single nutrients. Too much of anything isn't good. You can actually die from taking too much water. People have literally died because of the imbalance of electrolytes through having so much water that you flush all of the electrolytes out of your body, and people have died, right? So it's just like anything, don't take very high levels of a single nutrient. Okay, that's the first lesson. The second one, using synthetic nutrients can actually cause problems as opposed to reducing them. Well, that should be, you know, pretty common knowledge. But so only use high quality supplements that have been sourced, standardized and substantiated under strict manufacturing guidelines. In actual fact, if you, if anyone's ever read, who's read The Aging Myth by Joe Chang? Okay, only one, right? I highly, highly recommend that you read The Aging Myth by Joe Chang. Joe Chang, for those of you who don't know, is the leading scientist in Nu Skin. He was in Pharmanex, and when Nu Skin acquired Pharmanex, they acquired Joe, thank God. So if you read that book, he'll tell you exactly why he actually transitioned over into the Pharmanex and natural supplements as opposed to the pharmaceutical industry, because that's where he started. And the biggest problem hurdle that he faced when he made the transition was that the actual supplement industry was just nowhere near where it needed to be, and there were not good enough measures to actually substantiate. There was nothing like the pharmaceutical industry, which had, double-blind placebo studies on everything that they did. That just didn't occur. So he started Pharmanex for that exact reason, so that he could bring the quality of the supplements that we now produce up to exactly the same or better than pharmaceutical products. So that's one of the massive points of differentiation with Nu Skin products to just about anything else out there. It really is. Right? Lesson number 3, using a 1 or 2 nutrient approach is ineffective when fighting oxidative stress. Right? It's completely and utterly ineffective. It's like trying to bring down a locomotive with a rifle. Right? If you're going to try and bring down a train, then a handgun or a rifle probably isn't going to do much good. Right? You're going to need like a good bomb on the track, right? Something more substantial. And it's exactly the same with this. Okay, you can't use 1 or 2. There's no magic bullet. There's no one particular nutrient. I mean, resveratrol is great. Vitamin C on its own is fantastic. There are loads and loads of different nutrients, but alone, they're only as good as themselves. They're not particularly great. In fact, if you look at a Nu Skin business, right, you doing a Nu Skin business alone is far less effective than if you've got 10 teammates doing a Nu Skin. It's the same thing, right? The nutrients, it's completely ineffective, okay? So, essentially, ultimately, in those particular tests, the subjects just needed cellular nutrition, which is basically complete and balanced antioxidants at optimal levels. You need a balance of each, and antioxidants work in correlation with each other. They work to regenerate each other and actually improve the effectiveness of each other 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 times. So you need a good balance of each of them, right? So, in summary, so far, calorie control is a necessity for health and longevity. Do we agree?
Yes.
Agreed? Yes? Yeah. Cool. Optimal nutrition is a necessity for health and longevity. Have I proven that as well?
Yep.
Yep, cool. It is extremely difficult, near enough impossible, to get all of the necessary nutrients through our diet alone. Have I proven that point as well?
Yep.
Okay, I eat 6 meals a day, by the way, so I can tell you categorically that it's nigh impossible. This is evident in the leading underlying causes of death. True? True? Cool. Nutritional supplementation is actually a necessity, not a luxury, if you want to perform optimally. True? Okay. Not all supplements are created equally. They're most certainly not. If you go out to the supermarkets and you buy a $5 multivitamin, it's not going to do the same as Life Pack. Okay. Supplements need to be taken in optimal amounts in combination with each other. Right. So that is exactly what we learned from that. It's a bit of a headache, but we do have a solution. So, what's the first part of the solution? Well, the first part is the Biophotonic scanner. Ultimately, it literally is the ultimate nutritional lie detector test. That's exactly what it is. That's not my quote. That's Dr. Oz's quote. I don't know if any of you follow Dr. Oz or know who he is, but anyway, he's pretty widely known in America. So featured on his program. Now, it is the ultimate nutritional lie detector test, but I just want to try and reiterate and tell you guys exactly how I present the results of a Biophotonic scan to my clients, to whoever it is, because it's really important on how you deliver the information. Yes, the ultimate end goal is to get people on nutritional supplementation, but if it's not delivered in a way that people understand why that is, you're probably going to put them off and stop them from taking it altogether, right? They're going to think that you're trying to sell them something, which in reality you're not. We all know you're trying to improve their health, but it's the way you deliver that that's important. So there are 5 different factors that affect the result of the Biophotonic scan. Okay, the first of which is diet, right? So literally, if I'm seeing somebody, down with somebody, I've got a scan and it's 35,000, I'll literally say to them, okay, great. Well, what is your diet like first and foremost? What is your daily intake of fruits and vegetables predominantly? So I'll quiz them on that and try and help them in that regard. Then I'll ask them if they're taking any current supplementation, because this thing is going to tell us basically if that supplementation is working or not. And the majority of them I've already told you are not working. In fact, nearly all of them are not working. Body fat themselves, so depending on what body fat they've got, it will affect the actual results of the scan as well. We absorb more if we've got a leaner body fat. Lifestyle factors, so what is it? I quiz them on their job, what are they like doing on a daily basis? Do they have a lot of exposure to the sunlight, to chemicals, to whatever it may be, to try and reduce the amount of oxidative stress that they're causing on their bodies? How stressful are they? And 5 is genes, and that's a different topic. I'll actually be going over the next TEU the history of age like and exactly how genetic expression works and things. But anyway, that's a different topic. So I essentially focus on the first 4 of those and deliver the sort of results in a way that I'm trying to create a healthy lifestyle change. It's not just the supplements, but it's their entire lifestyle that you're trying to change, right? And the supplements help in a number of different ways. So it's not just the benefits through preventing degenerative diseases, but it's also an increase in energy, right? It's also an increase in immunity, so less coughs, colds, etc. There are so many different factors, but essentially what I tell people is that it's a bit of a chicken or the egg scenario, you know, which came first, right? Do you just start on nutritional supplements when your diet's not great, or do you wait for your diet to get great and then you start on nutritional supplements? Well, because your energy improves, you get ill less. You basically, what the supplements do is they give you a better, they allow you to make better healthy choices. So essentially by starting on supplementation, you're far more likely to affect those other elements, including diet and lifestyle especially, due to the fact that you're on that supplement, because your energy levels are better and it actually equalises blood sugar levels, so you're not always craving for foods and things. So it actually improves your lifestyle decisions that you can make, which will affect the other factors basically, right? So normal questions you'll get asked: how does it measure overall antioxidant concentrations? Well, you all know that it actually measures carotenoid antioxidants in particular, right? A particular type of antioxidant called a carotenoid. You get lycopene and astaxanthin and lots of the different types of carotenoids. But essentially, I asked Joe Chang this question in person just to get his response, and he told me exactly what happened. So essentially, yes, it measures carotenoid antioxidants, but the scientists at New Skin used 2 different biomarkers to determine whether that actually related to overall antioxidant concentrations. And the 2 biomarkers was one in the blood. They tested levels of vitamin C and vitamin E as some of these carotenoid antioxidants increased on the biophotonic scanner, and they noticed that whenever that happened, their concentration of vitamin C and vitamin E in the blood increased. The second biomarker they used was in the urine, something called isoprostane. If you Google it, you'll actually see it's a very well-known biomarker of oxidative stress. So as people's antioxidant concentrations increased on here, they also noticed that the amount of oxidative stress using this isoprostane decreased, right? Which tells us that it's an overall correlation of antioxidant concentrations, not just carotenoids. Does that make sense? Mm. Yeah? Cool. All right, so secondly, does it measure deficiencies of specific nutrients? I get asked that quite a bit. Well, no, it doesn't, but I've just told you specific nutrients are very, very, very ineffective in terms of optimal nutrition and optimizing health, right? So you don't really need to know deficiencies in specific nutrients unless you're something like, you know, if you're anemic or something else, then don't get me wrong, go and see a naturopath, you know. If you've got specific individual issues which you know are a problem and you need to boost certain minerals or deficiencies or whatever it is, then you can go get the test right. But essentially you don't need to know specific nutrient deficiencies in order to become optimally nourished, because they all work as one. And I've just told you as well that as your antioxidant levels are increasing on here, you can be sure that other nutrients in the body are also increasing as well. Okay. Can't I just get a blood test? Well, no, not really, because the blood's just a method of transport. So whatever's in your blood is not necessarily at the cellular level. You're not absorbing it, it's just flowing around in your blood at the moment. You might absorb it, but you don't know if you're absorbing it or not. Whereas with this, we're actually testing at the cellular level, which is why you generally don't test anyone within a month. I wouldn't test anyone. Normally it's 60 days. I don't normally retest anyone within a 60-day period, but because it takes that long for things to change dramatically at the cellular level, basically. So that's the difference. It's also non-invasive, which helps. And the second part of the solution is that it's impossible for any of us to predict or know exactly what amount of nutrients we need to become optimally nourished in specific quantities, but we don't have to do that because New Skin have done it for us. So there are 2 products in particular. I mean, we've got other fantastic products, T-Green, R Squared's great. There's some in grapeseed extract in R Squared. There's 12.7 grams of grapeseed basically, which is extremely potent stuff. But I'm just going to talk about these 2. So LivePak and LivePak Prime, it's basically the first comprehensive dietary supplement to show antioxidant benefits in double-blind, placebo-controlled studies. So if you remember what I was saying about the pharmaceutical industry and the problem in nutritional supplements compared to pharmaceuticals, we've now corrected that with New Skin. So double-blind, placebo-controlled studies is basically when the participant taking the supplement and the people that are actually testing, you know, the testers, the actual people that are studying this, have absolutely no idea whether it was person A or person B that takes the supplement or the placebo. Right? The placebo is just nothing basically. right? So the person taking it and the person assessing has no idea who takes what, right? So it's a completely fair study. Clinically significant amounts of micronutrients. The live pack formulation is actually based off an average person's diet. So New Skin look at an average person's diet, sort of intake for nutrients for the average person, and then they basically formulate life pack from that amount there. And there are actually 644 research studies using the formulation. 644 studies used to formulate life pack. Not 1, not 2, not 10, 644. I actually have all of them. Joe Chang sent me them personally. That's what a great guy is. But 644 studies for that formulation. Amazing. Right, Wispan, it is it's the most advanced nutritional supplement on the market today, categorically. There's nothing that compares with that supplement, there really isn't. If you've listened to Giselle on any of the Tuesday nights or whatever, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It's phenomenal. I'm not going to go into the details, I'm sure you've heard it before, but revitalises and restores your body's internal aging defence mechanisms, positively modulates gene expression with a unique blend of ingredients that are not readily available from eating the healthiest of diets. That's another valid point. Forget all the optimal nutrition, forget all the stuff you can get. You actually can't even get a lot of the nutrients that are in this from diet whatsoever. You literally can't. It's like impossible, some of the stuff, it really is. It also uses LICAP technology, allowing a combination of liquids and solids in a single capsule, allowing for an enhanced bioavailability. So what I mean by that is you get a lot of, well, you can break down vitamins into two things, water soluble and fat soluble. Anything that's fat soluble basically requires fat in combination for your body to store it properly. So things like vitamin D, which is in Wispan, in combination with omega-3s in one serving, increases the amount that you'll absorb properly at cell level, which is great. Cool, so the actual quality control process, which I'm sure you guys are all aware, 6 different sections: selection, sourcing, structure, standardization, safety and substantiation. Do you reckon that goes on in supermarket stuff? No, definitely not. No. So that's exactly what happens with Pharmanex and New Skin with every single product. So yes, you pay a lot more for the products than you would do in a supermarket, but you can either take stuff that's actually going to be detrimental to your health or doesn't do anything and is like expensive urine, or you can take stuff that is proven, scientifically improved will help your health and reduce the aging process over time. That's basically it. Cool, so, and that's basically it, guys. I hope you can see now that, through the presentation itself, that we literally can go out and empower people to improve lives through the innovative products that we have. You literally can, and you really need you need to look quite deep inside and see what you really want to do with this business and have a real vision as to how you can help the larger population out there if you're going to build this properly. There's a saying that I heard one of the team elites say in a recent, I think it was the convention actually. He actually said, well, people without a vision, if you don't have a vision, your reality will be determined by the perception of other people. Right? I'll say that one more time. If you don't have a vision for what you're actually doing, if you can't see the end goal, if you can't see where you're going, if you haven't got an end structure where you can see yourself amongst tens of thousands of people, whatever it may be, then your reality will be determined by what other people think that you're doing, whether it be good or bad. Completely true, right? An example of that would be Henry Ford and his cars. Before he actually started creating cars, people thought they just needed to get better horses to go quicker. Right? They didn't even think cars were possible, and so many people told him that it was a ridiculous idea, it would never work. But he had a very clear vision of where he wanted to do and what he wanted to create, and he couldn't care less what anybody else told him. He went and he manufactured cars, and that's what happens. You need to do the same thing in this business. You need a real clear vision of exactly what you want to do, where you want to go, and how many people you want to affect. Right? It doesn't matter how many people tell you that whatever you're doing is different, crazy, whatever it is. You just got to keep that vision in mind. It doesn't matter how many times you get told no, whatever it is, you'll do it anyway. Right? So you need that clear vision. I hope this has helped you, get an understanding of what's really possible. And finally, I'm just going to play this one. I played this at the TU as well, but the point of this quick testimonial from another distributor in New Skin who has started using Age Like Me is just to say that it's not just the nutritional supplements that can actually do what I previously said and change people's lives. And actually Rose, when I talked to her earlier on, was telling me how she got introduced through the business with the galvanic spa, and she's exactly the same sort of situation. So it's actually the skincare products that can make a big difference to somebody's life and their confidence and their ability to go out there and do what they want as well. So I'm just going to really quickly play this testimonial.
Hi everybody, I'm going to talk to you about my personal experience with the Age Like Me. So I've been lucky enough to be using the ageLOC Me for 50 days, and I have noticed 4 huge differences with my skin. The first one being pore size. I had quite large pores around my nose, and they're already decreasing. I usually have quite an oily T-zone, and the oil has reduced hugely. I have also had lots of compliments on the vibrancy of my skin tone, and also wrinkles are minimising. So my frown line, unfortunately, has always been a bit of a problem area for me, and around my eyes, the fine lines from sleep deprivation. And another thing that ageLOC Me has given me is the confidence to leave the house without makeup on. So, as a woman, most of you here would know that we love to put our makeup on before leaving the house to give us that extra confidence. And I haven't really been able to leave the house for about 3 years without firstly applying my makeup. And so when I woke up one day and thought, you know what, my skin's looking pretty good without makeup. And yeah, I went shopping with my son and I felt great. So that's a huge win for me. It's also really user-friendly, and I love how it has the flashing light. So when I go to brush my teeth at night time, the light will flash and it will remind me that I need to apply my serum and night cream, which is fantastic. The travel pods, I recently used them on a trip that we took up the coast, and they're amazing. They're really compact, really small, didn't take up too much room in my suitcase, and I was really, really pleased about it. So if you don't have an ageLOC Me, I'd really, really recommend to go purchase one and start using it, because the difference you will see in your skin will be huge. The technology of this product is absolutely amazing, and it's unlike anything else you'll see out there. Okay, thank you, bye.
Cool. So, thank you very much. Thanks,